There was this man I worked with at Walmart some years back. Always a nice guy, helpful, etc. Turns out, he passed away a few months ago. He was in his 60s, I think. The circumstances of his death left me depressed and just sad. He apparently died alone, with his power cut off, because he couldn't afford the bill. People didn't find out about him until a week or so later after he died. I still think about him almost daily. Even though he more than likely forgot who I was, we didn't have any interaction outside of work. It saddens me greatly to learn how he died. My friend's grandma and uncle were in an incestuous relationship. The grandmother and uncle lived with my friend. They were his dad's mother and brother. Anyway, the old lady was crazy. She used to hoard newspapers, then one day set them on fire while everyone was asleep and just left. She locked my friend, his brother, and their mom in the basement. They heard through the vents of her bragging on the phone about a gun she bought and was going to shoot them with. Their mom climbed out a window when grandma left and swiped the gun and buried it. She once chased my friend through the house with a huge cleaver. I was so fascinated by that story that I wanted the cleaver. My friend gave it to me like 20 years later as a wedding present. I call it the cursed cleaver of First Street. My great aunt died about a year ago. She was in her mid-70s. We were unpacking all her things and we found her diaries, some from years ago and some just before her death. In her diary she had mentioned that she despised her sister. To be honest, none of us liked her and didn't like a lot of my cousins. Most shocking, she kept on talking about a man who she called "monster." This man had been sexually harassing her and abusing her for years. She never mentioned it, nor indicated that anything was wrong. We suspect that it was her boss. I loved her dearly, she was so sweet. A few years after my great aunt passed away, we found out that she had a daughter no one in our family knew about. The daughter, who I'll call M, had been put up for adoption when my aunt was very young. M had been searching for her missing side of the family since she was young and was in her 50s when she finally found us. Unfortunately, she never got to meet her biological mother, but she and her daughters couldn't be happier to have found us, and we have welcomed them in with open arms. My family is very musically inclined, and several of us play or played instruments, my great aunt included. M's daughter is very musically talented and always says that she never knew where she got it from until she met us. Her daughter told us that learning there was this whole side of her family who is just like her was one of her greatest moments in life. M acts and talks exactly like my aunt did, always saying quirky stuff and being very animated, which fascinates me because she never was able to grow up and live with my aunt. My family is very close-knit and it hit really hard when my aunt passed away, so finding this woman who is my aunt made over has been such a blessing. Sorry for the long story, I just love telling it. That my friend co-worker would talk about me to his family, in good terms of course. When he passed from cancer last year I met his parents and introduced myself as a former coworker. Told them that he was always really encouraging back in the day when I always spoke of wanting to be a writer. His mom perked up and said, "Oh, he used to talk about you. He always hoped it would work out for you." I found that to be very encouraging. I cried a bit in the car as I was leaving the wake. We very recently found out via ancestry.com that my grandfather had an illegitimate child that was born the year he married my grandmother. I have a half aunt, blood test confirmed. She's 50 and only knew who her father could be, my grandpa, because her mother told her what his name possibly was, went looking, and she eventually found us. My mother sent her DNA test in to confirm, and it was a match. Edit. He passed away 19 years ago after a car accident. My great grandpa had a second family that he didn't see as often. He was married the first time for only about a year before his wife and newborn both passed away in a car accident, 1945-ish. Then he got remarried to my great grandma and none of our family knew he was still in contact with his first family when he passed away around 2010. It's really weird seeing a dozen strangers at a funeral that all say they are related to the deceased, but the other 40 relatives had no idea they were still in contact. My mom's step-grandpa told everyone he was an electrician and that he was always being called out of town to do various repair jobs. After he died, the family received a letter from the President of the United States, revealing that he was actually a demolitions expert and worked in some sort of special ops bomb squad for the military. Even his wife had no idea. My dad was an Air Force pilot who was killed in a crash during a plane malfunction. I grew up thinking he couldn't do anything and couldn't land, and that was it. 20 years after he died, I found out he had the choice between jettisoning to safety and risking the plane landing on the base and killing people, or steering the plane as far away from people as he could and going down with it. I hate that I grew up without a dad, but I'm glad he at least died saving people. My alcoholic, gambling addicted dad had saved so many lives and was an actually good human being. He was a surgeon for 20 years in one of the top hospital in the country. But the corruption was so widespread throughout the country that if you have a family member in the you better pay some kickback to the nurse and doctor if you want them to take care of your dying member. If you are poor and unable to pay, most likely your family member will not survive. My dad, on another hand, hated corruption and would never accepted it. He banned his team from receiving kickback as well. He would try to save anyone who came to his care. So at his funeral, around 300 to 400 people came and said final thank you to my dad. But one person stand out the most for me was this old man. He told us that when he got out of prison, he had no money, no family, and when he went to the after getting into some serious accident, my dad went beyond to save his life and tried to get the hospital to forgive his medical bill. But none of our siblings really had any good relationship with him when he was still alive. After my stepdad committed suicide, we found all the reasons why. The same night we called his best friend, who told us that my stepdad spent most of the days at his house. To his friend he said that he worked at night. He put on working clothes and went back home to my mom pretending to have worked all day. His work told that he was fired months ago. Days after, letters kept pouring in, all bills, thousands of euros he had to pay. In the trash outside there were slippered bills he intercepted before my mom got home every day. My mom glued every one of them together to have a better view of everything. He also lent money in her name, about 15k, which she had to pay back because she couldn't prove it that he did it. At the funeral home they found out that he still had his teeth. He never pulled them at the dentist because he hadn't been paying health insurance. He pretended a couple times these months to be in real pain though, and his throat was so sore that he could barely talk. We think he must have screamed for hours in his car or something to sound like that to pretend it to us. To his parents he said that he had a new car the week before and drove to them. The car was a loan. He also said that he found a wallet with 300 euros and had it in cash in his hands. We had such a fun day with that money, but my mom found out after he died that he just cashed it from his bank. He must have felt so horrible about this money issue and knew no way out of it. We still miss him. He was a very funny guy and he taught me a lot in my teenage years. But boy, he did leave a mess behind. And his 6-year-old son, which I'm still sad about because his mom passed away too when he was 2. On her deathbed, my grandmother revealed to my father that she had been married during the war and that her husband had died. She'd had a single daughter with him, but being an orphan with no parents to help her to raise a child, she was forced to give her up for adoption. My dad kept the information to himself for about 30 to 40 years before he casually dropped it into a conversation while we were watching TV. We have no idea where we would even begin to look for her. Does anybody know anything about finding out information about adopted British children during World War II? Last fall we discovered that my paternal grandmother had had an illegitimate child with a young military man who had just returned to the States at the end of WWII. When she passed away we found a hidden stash of love letters that had been sent between them. At the time, we had asked her best friend, my godmother, about it and she denied any knowledge of a former partner of that description. But thanks to family members who became enthralled with the concept, we discovered my dad and his brothers had a half-brother living only 2 hours away. Last fall he welcomed us into his home to finally meet his estranged family. We discovered he had been very close to the family physician who was considered an uncle despite no actual familial relation. It was a very emotional afternoon as my dad and his brothers shared stories with the brother they never knew they had, even discovering that my eldest uncle, oldest of her legitimate children, was named after the family that adopted the secret son. I had a friend who passed away in a car accident, 20 years old, and it was pretty devastating to the whole community. He was a great guy, but after he died, a ton of stuff came to my attention about him. For instance, he had lied about his mother dying as she was very much alive and having had a terminal illness. He had also told me he was near genius IQ and had chosen the pretty mediocre university we went to over the Ivy League because of scholarship money. He is still a great guy in my eyes, but it did teach me a lesson about gullibility.